Finance is not a substitute for climate policies and actions, but finance is a necessary input to facilitate such actions. So what role can finance constructively play in the climate transition? And how must finance itself be transformed to play that role effectively? Hello everyone, I'm Corinne Ho at the Bank for International Settlements. Welcome to the Green Swan Conference. We are now at the beginning of a session that will look into these questions. And to kick off this session is our keynote speaker, Dr. Zhou Xiaochuan. Dr. Zhou is Vice Chairman of the Boao Forum for Asia and China's Chief Representative to this group. He is also a member of the Group of 30 and the Chinese Economists 50 Forum. For over 15 years, between late 2002 and early 2018, he was the governor of the People's Bank of China. Before that, between 1991 and 2002, he had served in a succession of senior positions, including Vice President of the Bank of China, Administrator of the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, President of the China Construction Bank, and Chairman of the China Securities Regulatory Commission. Dr. Zhou began his career in public service in the mid-1980s after receiving his doctoral degree from Tsinghua University. Between 1986 and 1991, he was a member of the State Commission for Restructuring the Economic System. In the early part of this period, he was for 3 years assistant minister in what was the equivalent of today's Ministry of Commerce. So with this long and remarkable career, Dr. Zhou is well recognized and highly regarded as a bold reformer who brings to the table a long-term view, analytical rigor, and pragmatic decision-making. Today, in the face of the climate emergency, the world also needs bold reforms. So there is perhaps no better person than Dr. Zhou to help us move the debate forward. He will be speaking today on the role and potential of the financial sector in the context of climate change. Among other topics, he will be sharing with us his views on carbon markets. So, Dr. Zhou, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. Whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ho, to introduce me. It's my great pleasure to attend the second Green Swan Conference. Many issues remain to be explored under the topic of role of financial sectors in climate transition. And I would like to share some of my views. The first, I emphasize that achieving net zero requires massive investment. Facing global climate changes, the financial sector should squarely take over its responsibility. The most daunting task to achieving net zero is the coming decades is to mobilize massive investment. It's estimated that China would need climate financing of at least 140 trillion yuan, or up to several hundred trillion yuan. Globally, the financing need is much larger. Therefore, how to mobilize and take good use of such large investment is a major challenge facing the financial sector. Fiscal budget can only contribute a small fraction, and a large amount of funds should be mobilized from debt or equity market and bank loans. No other sectors than financial sector could mobilize such a massive investment. For undertaking this task, we need not only to access market, but also rely on appropriate incentive mechanism. In other words, apart from a moral obligation, financial institutions and the private investors are always price sensitive. They need a predictable, measurable, and reasonable investment return which must be related to a sort of incentive system. Thus, incentives play a key role in investment realization. A lot needs to be done in China to attract such a huge investment. In the near term, we need to formulate a consensus regarding carbon market setup among financial and non-financial institutions. In addition, it's necessary to establish a database system of statistics, basic indicators, and MRV conditions, so that various financial tools such as bond and loans could be clearly calculated based on the database and soundly disclose of information regarding greenhouse gas emission and its impact on climate change. The financial sector itself should also take the lead in reducing emission and achieving net zero in its own operation, even though it is not, it's only an insignificant emitter. In short, it's important for the financial sector to lay down a well-functioned market infrastructure. And what's more important and difficult is to mobilize funds on a large scale, which market incentive mechanism, and to channel these funds to non-fossil energy and the other concerned sectors. It's important to emphasize that a significant portion of the funding should go to R&D of new technology and facilities for the emission reduction, as well as equipment upgrading in various industries. I know that somebody may argue about the importance of financial sector involvement. Someone may argue that emission reduction related more to physics, chemistry, and engineering rather than to finance. So it's merely a business of the industrial sector. Someone else also argued that they heard in some occasions there are already 130 trillion US dollars commitment of fundraising for net zero. Thus, no need to worry about the money. So I think it's wrong talking. A deeper study shows that it is wrong to downplay the challenge to finance, and the financial sector play a critical and unsubstitutable roles in fundraising. Second topic that I would like to emphasize the role of the financial sector in pricing, risk management, intertemporal and cross-border investment. First, financial market is needed for price discovery and enabling long-term investment. Commodity prices have long been set by the financial market. That said, the carbon market needs to be engaged the financial sector, not because its market possesses financial attributes, but in that it requires price discovery function excelled by the financial sector. Second, the carbon market model at its early stage is mainly mandated to formulate a spot price of temporary equilibrium between carbon emission and carbon offset. But most of the investments need to get forward prices of intertemporal equilibrium, which can only bring investment results after at least 2 or 3 years. Some of R&D projects, such as controlled nuclear fusion, need even longer times before generating a certainty of return. Investment in R&D, equipment upgrading, and building a new factories and facilities rely on intertemporal prices. The financial sector has always focused on and good at intertemporal scale, which involved maturity transformation, futures market, discount profit and cost accounting, and etc. Third, long-term investment inevitably involves a lot of risk management. Investment in a new technology and facility contain uncertainty and risk. The financial sector that is very equipped with skills, experience, and professionals in risk management, which is surely up to this job. Fourth, many investments are cross-border projects. Cross-border operations and resource allocation have to deal with different currency, exchange rates, risk hedging through a financial market and financial accountings, which also fall into the remit of the financial sector. The third topic I would like to put is to promoting connectivity among carbon trading markets. Early in these years, we have a broad forum in China. Some people proposed to divide the carbon market into the carbon emission quota market and carbon offset market, as well as the other segmented market, such as carbon removals, carbon reductions, or CCER. CCER is a Chinese certified emission reduction, which is a certification or a quota to sell because they could create a carbon sink or carbon reduction. In fact, the carbon market is supposed to be a logically unified or interconnected market with its scale as large as possible to cover all carbon-related trade, providing consistency in incentive and disincentive. In other words, emitters have to demand to buy emission quota at the carbon prices. And those firms creating carbon reduction, such as CCUS, carbon sink, and related technology and facility, become a negative quota supplier to sell the quota in the market. In aggregate, the all quota in demand side, the preceding, we say that sigma Q sigma quota in demand multiply the price of the carbon from auction emission quota is supposed to equal to those of quota supplier for funding carbon sink and carbon reduction activity. In terms of direct link between supply and demand, establishing a unified interconnected carbon market could prevent the funding from being misallocated. In other words, if the proceeds from auctioning the quota in demand side are misused for the other purpose, and the carbon offsets activity have to be funded with money from somewhere else, it would obviously be non-optimal. At the same time, the unified or interconnected carbon market could help in terms of a constraint equation that's the quota in demand side minus quota in supply side should less than the annual cap. So that's the national pledge or commitment for the carbon reduction for each year. Dynamically, the constraint equation for the coming decades will support the carbon neutrality roadmap and timetable. Similarly, if the carbon tax, including the border adjustment mechanism, is set up, the tax revenue from carbon emission quota should all go to the budget for carbon reduction, carbon sink or offset, and not for the other purpose. It's easier to understand the temporary balance between quota in demand side and the quota in supply side. However, for guiding investment, we need to put the temporary model into intertemporary model, taking account that investment in carbon reduction, carbon sink, and CCUS, etc., should generate future returns and need to be used. Need to use future price and net percent value method to calculate the percent investment decision. Therefore, in concept, it seems possible to divide the carbon market into sub-markets for trading specific product. But in practice, and for the sake of interconnected functions and the further market development, the choice must be based on the optimization of price discovery and resource allocation. We need to build mathematical models and its expression to deepen the understanding of the objective and the function relationship of the market. In general, the mathematical model of economy may have an objective function to maximize GDP under constraints of production factors, such as production capacity, labor force, aggregate savings, technology, and intelligence. One annual carbon emission cap is added as an additional constraint to this model, that it causes a contraction to GDP with a corresponding cost of carbon dioxide shadow price. The annual target of carbon emission is from the roadmap and the timetable of transition to net zero. Similarly, other major greenhouse gases can also be added as a constraint, which means several kinds of emission quota. The model will fund the optimal resource allocation corresponding shadow price, where the loss of GDP should be minimized. The fourth topic I would like to present here is in practice, we have a major three ways for initial quota assignment. There are three major ways to assign the initial carbon quota, which with a different consideration of the transition. They are the incremental quota method, the full quota method, and the hybrid method. Under the incremental quota method, the total carbon emission in the base years are approved with a quota for free. The incremental carbon emission must subject to paid quotas in the market, while the incremental emission reductions and the carbon offset, such as in China, the CCER, can get certified supply-side quota to be sold in the same market. Under the full quota method, all annual emission, both the stock and the incremental part, are subjected to pay the quota in the market. All the certified carbon reduction and offset get a supply-side quota to sell. Considering that some industry and company are still in early stage of transition, the full cap method may impose too much pressure upon them. A transitional hybrid method is to combine the full and the incremental method. The incremental method can be adopted for the first year. Later on, every year after that, an additional 10% of base year emission needs to be paid. Then it may take 10 years to transit to the full quota method. This approach also applied to another form of transition, where some sectors are initially excluded in the quota requirement, but gradually all sectors must get in. The above three methods are all feasible in practice. To be acceptable to all the party, the compromise might be needed between optimization and the practice with the consideration of public acceptance. Meanwhile, no matter which method is adopted, it's important that the shadow price is visible to all concerned entities who could see the transition map accordingly. The mathematical relationship should be as clear as possible. In addition, it's worth mentioning that the shadow carbon price and the trading quota price in market are not necessarily the same. If a specific quota method is chosen, when we debate on the carbon prices, we need to clarify what kind of carbon quota refers to. The quota price gap may also involve historical and country-specific factors. Some developing countries are still use a very primitive ways of production, whose carbon emission can be easily reduced through equipment upgrading. So the marginal cost of emission reduction is relatively low. But after several years of globalized action, this extremely low marginal cost and easy upgraded effort will be gradually used up. By then, the national carbon quota price will eventually converge globally. The fifth topic, if I may touch upon our session asked to comment on the greenwashing or transition washing. At present, greenwashing does not have a unique definition and is very wide-ranging. In addition, the definition of green varies from country to country. Here in this forum, it could be narrowed to carbon washing or GHG washing. There is no standalone method to verify if a financial institute is involved in carbon washing. It depends on whether and to what extent the carbon could be reduced by the relevant real economic activity the financial service supports. In China, the CCER can be used to label the greenness of the financial service activity. Encouragement or incentive could be given to entities that generate CCER, providing that CCER can be sold in market and can acquire government subsidy or enjoy tax cut. Any other form of greenness recognition for the related financial activity should be symbolic, with a view to preventing from distortions. If loans and bonds are labeled for the carbon reduction, the concerned debtor are able to get the certified quota, the CCER, as an incentive to sell. Otherwise, they name themselves as a green without benefit would be self-deceiving. The financial regulator could also watch over CCER in the financial entity which gain the CCER, can be entitled to a lower risk weight because the probability and potential failure of the concerned real economic operation seems lower than normal. If there were no misuse of subsidy and incentive, it won't hurt too much if there were exaggeration in self-reporting green data. In other areas, such as financial inclusion, we have a similar washing problem. Transition washing need a clearer definition. In fact, CCER is related to the transition process. The concerned authority calculate and verify carbon offset and reduction, then certifies the sellable quota. According to the roadmap and the timetable of the total carbon goals, the total amount of certified quota in supply side help to formulate the quota price and make a quantitative assessment of the transition. The concept of CCER in China could be expanded from Chinese certified emission reduction to a comprehensive certified emission reduction, covering three parts of activity. The first part is carbon offset of a broad concept, including carbon sink, carbon removal, and the CCUS. The second part of carbon cutting within a company, which is not yet included in the market trading at the present stage. The third part is the third-party activity providing technology, materials, or equipment, which is indirectly help somebody to reduce the carbon emission. Finally, as a brief summary, I add some items on the financial sector to-do list. The first, for loan and investment, the future returns of emission reduction must be discounted to their 90% value. The second, inflation must taken into account. Inflation risk, which remains uncertain, should be hedged when calculating the carbon quota constraint and the carbon price. Since climate change and the net zero effort have a long time horizon, the cumulative impact of inflation would be significant. Third, the uncertainty and the risk of the investment return must be taken into account. A larger number of these investments related to new technology and R&D has demand of using risk management tools available in financial derivative market and calls for further development of risk management tools and skills. The fourth, due to the uncertainty and the available technology in the future, many parameters of climate change model need to be dynamically adjusted. In 2020, Chinese President Mr. Xi Jinping announced China's 2030 and 2060 goals, and China financial sector has been working hard to make a due contribution to achieve the goals. At the same time, the process should be optimized to achieve the desired target at the minimum and reasonable cost, rather than imposing excessive contraction impact on the economic welfare and the living standard. Suppose I'm stopping here, but if I may use 1 or 2 minutes to add a 4 point, it's a technical consideration or design for the practical actions in this regard. Number one is that we can consider to use controllable wires or the diameter of the tubes to connect different carbon market, which have a feature that's gradually that the carbon price is going to converge. The second is that if the broader adjustment mechanism is adopted, yeah, we know that there are different opinions in European country and the developing country. That's what is the way to compromise that for the both sides. The third one is that we need to have a better data of carbon foot, which we may use the practice of VAT, the value-added tax, to consider to establish carbon-added footprint, which to calculate that's complicated supply chains, that's which stages to have a carbon-added emission and to get a better data, and maybe also for the purpose of carbon tax. The final one is, let me see. We need a kind of a gradual approach for the final consumer consumptions to undertake a certain amount of carbon cost. Also, it should be gradual, but we need to move into this direction. We may have some of technical consideration and technical designs to reach that. So that's what I may present here as top here. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhou, for setting the scene so comprehensively with all you. I think you have hit all the right notes there. The various themes that you have touched upon will no doubt be further developed in the rest of the session and throughout the conference. So thank you very, very much again for being with us today. Now this brings this item to a close. Coming up next is a roundtable that will address the question, what can the public and private sectors do to turn transition finance frameworks into actions? The discussion will be chaired by Ma Jun and will feature 7 other high caliber experts from different sectors. The roundtable will start right after a short break, so don't go too far away. Thank you.